The young man with the ultimate movie star looks was the subject of frenzied attention, but in an ornate hearing room, not a Hollywood soundstage. Flashbulbs popped in a crush of spectators, hundreds of sighing women, as one paper put it, strained to see him. Robert Taylor, the matinee idol dubbed the man with the perfect profile, was raising his right hand before Congress in October 1947. The House Un-American Activities Committee had summoned him to testify about communist influence in Hollywood, and Taylor, handsome jaw set, voice steady, obliged by denouncing what he called signs of communist activity in the film industry. In that tense moment, he named colleagues he believed were subversive agitators, and in doing so, he knowingly put colleagues' careers at risk. It was an intense and surreal tableau, one of the silver screen's most beloved leading men cast in a real-life political drama. So how did a Nebraska farm boy turned Hollywood heartthrob end up here, entangled in the heart of America's Red Scare, before his life was cut tragically short? Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. If the name Robert Taylor sounds almost too Hollywood, there's a reason for that. Taylor was born with a far less cinematic name, Spangler Arlington Brew, on August 5, 1911, in a tiny village of Philly, Nebraska. He was the only child of Spangler Andrew Brew, a farmer turned osteopath, and his wife, Ruth Adeline née Stanhope. The Brews moved frequently when Arlington was little, from Nebraska to Oklahoma and Missouri, before settling in the town of Beatrice, Nebraska in 1917. In Beatrice, young Arlie grew up in a wholesome middle American world that would shape his values for life. His parents were loving but traditional. They imparted in him a strong work ethic, courtesy, and a streak of all-American decency. Neighbors later recalled the Brew household as tight-knit and principled, his mother often housebound by illness and doted on by husband and son, his father a gentle disciplinarian who expected his boy to do his chores and mind his manners. Taylor himself reflected that his parents' devoted marriage, quote, conditioned my young idea of what marriage should be and how a man ought to treat a woman. It was an upbringing of Midwestern rectitude, Methodist church on Sundays and simple pleasures on the prairie. Yet there was also a touch of performance in Arlington from early on. He was a natural athlete, a track and field star in high school, but it was music that first captured his heart. Encouraged by a music teacher, he took up the cello as a boy, and he lugged his instrument to weekly lessons in Lincoln. By his teens, he was playing in the school orchestra and a string quartet, even winning statewide music competitions. Tall, blue-eyed, and shyly handsome, Arlington imagined a future not on the silver screen, but on the concert stage, or perhaps following his father into medicine. After graduating high school in 1929, he enrolled at Doane College in Crete, Nebraska, ostensibly to study medicine while continuing his musical training. In truth, he was torn between careers. He excelled at Doane. He served as freshman class president and played in the college orchestra, but the pool of music grew stronger. He idolized his cello mentor, Professor Herbert Gray, who recognized Arlington's talent and urged him to pursue it professionally. When Gray accepted a position at Pomona College in California in 1931, Arlington decided he would follow his teacher west. Packing up his Midwestern life, the earnest 20-year-old headed for California, with the idea of continuing his studies at Pomona, and utterly unaware that he was hurtling toward movie stardom. At Pomona College, Arlington Brew's life took a turn. Southern California in the early 1930s was, of course, the beating heart of the film industry, and even on a small liberal arts campus, the Hollywood influence loomed large. Arlington joined the campus theater group almost on a lark. He was, by all accounts, an unlikely actor at first, earnest, a bit stiff, and focused more on his music and studies than stagecraft. But one day, Pomona's drama club announced it would stage Journey's End, a wrenching World War I play, and it caught his eye. Arlington auditioned and, to his own surprise, won a role. It was a small production, but in the audience sat a talent scout from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Hollywood agents prowled college theaters in those days on the lookout for fresh-faced talent, and the wholesome Nebraskan with the strong profile and resonant baritone was an interesting prospect. In 1932, before he'd even finished college, Arlington Brew was offered a screen test, a golden ticket to Hollywood. He passed that test, and in 1934, MGM signed him to a contract. Studio boss Louis B. Mayer promptly and quite accurately decreed that Spangler Arlington Brew would never fit on a marquee. Thus was born Robert Taylor, a name as square-jawed and all-American as the young man who now bore it. Before I go any further into Robert Taylor's dazzling rise, I'd like to show you all the range of shirts I now have available in the Hollywood Mystery Store. All the shirts are designed in-house and are completely exclusive to Hollywood Mysteries. You won't see these anywhere else, so if you're wearing one, it'll be something a little special. I have designs featuring quite a few silent-era stars such as Louise Brooks, Gloria Swanson, Rudolph Valentino, and Pola Negri. And one of my recent designs is the iconic Barbara Stanwyck, a woman you'll be hearing a lot more about later in this episode. You can find a link to the store down in the description and also on screen now. Every sale is a huge help to the channel, and I love seeing the messages you send with the purchases over on the site. Thank you so much to all of you who have purchased one. Feel free to check it out and grab some unique Hollywood merch. At first, Taylor was just one of dozens of starry-eyed contract players at MGM, and far from the most promising. In fact, his initial salary was a measly $35 a week, which was a record low for any studio player up to that point. The newcomer spent his days acting in screen tests opposite young actresses, a fact that won him the unglamorous nickname the Test Boy, and lingering in the background of B-movies. He made his film debut with a fleeting bit part in 1934's Handy Andy, a Will Rogers comedy. For a while, the studio didn't quite know what to do with him, if anything at all. Taylor's looks were impeccable: dark wavy hair crowned by a dramatic widow's peak, piercing blue eyes, a chiseled jawline. But his acting was rough and his confidence uncertain. Critics would later joke that in those early roles he was as wooden as the cello he once played. MGM continued to cast him in forgettable fare, presumably to test whether his photogenic face could carry a scene alone. Then fate intervened. Late in 1934, during the shooting of a short film, the lead actor fell ill and the director needed an emergency replacement. The call went out for the reliable Test Boy. Taylor stepped into the role, an embezzler who disfigures himself in the crime drama Buried Loot, and delivered a performance so intense it completely startled everyone concerned. Suddenly, MGM realized what they had: a leading man in the making, given the right kind of role. In 1935, he got his first big break when Irene Dunne requested the up-and-comer as her co-star in Magnificent Obsession. Taylor, then just 24, played a dashing playboy reformed by love, and his gentle charm opposite Dunne lit up the screen. Audiences swooned for the handsome newcomer with the earnest style. That same year, MGM paired him to shoot with its greatest star, Greta Garbo, in the lush romance Camille. Playing Armand, the ardent young lover to Garbo's doomed courtesan, Taylor held his own and then some. The film became a classic and Robert Taylor's star ascended with it. In the span of 2 years, he had gone from a $35 a week nobody to one of Hollywood's most talked-about leading men. By the late 1930s, Robert Taylor's face was on magazine covers worldwide, and his name consistently near the top of theater marquees. At just under 6 feet tall with an athletic build, immaculately tailored suits, and that photogenic face, he was every inch the romantic idol. Fans inundated him with letters and mobbed him at premieres. In London, he was greeted by screaming crowds like a Beatle 25 years before Beatlemania. In a 1937 nationwide poll of 20 million filmgoers, Taylor was voted the second most important male star in America, just behind Clark Gable. MGM's publicity machine christened him the man with the perfect profile, a moniker that stuck for the rest of his life. He was often compared to Rudolph Valentino, another darkly handsome idol who had set hearts aflutter a generation earlier. Yet Taylor himself remained modest to a fault, a very un-Valentino-like trait. When asked to explain his enduring appeal, he shrugged. "Darned if I know. I guess the most important thing is to get a good picture once in a while. Acting is the easiest job in the world, and I'm the luckiest guy." Indeed, not everyone was convinced at first that Taylor was more than a pretty face. One critic wrote that his appearance in the 1942 comedy Her Cardboard Lover was fitting because his acting was, well, cardboard. Co-star Louise Rayner once asked Taylor about his life goals. He replied that he wanted nothing more than, quote, 10 perfectly tailored suits. A joke Rayner took as proof of his American superficiality, though others realized Taylor was in fact poking fun at himself. But Taylor worked hard to hone his craft. He was collegial on set, keen to learn, and notably free of ego. He was the sweetest man to work with, remembered actress Shelley Winters, noting how he was cooperative and understanding, in contrast to most leading men, who try to elbow you out of camera range or are off in a corner practicing method acting. Taylor's gracious good guy reputation would only grow over time. For now, buoyed by his success in romantic melodramas, he branched out into new genres. He proved a capable song and dance man in the musical Broadway Melody of 1936, and showed a flair for light comedy in A Yank at Oxford. This was actually the first MGM picture shot in England, and this made Taylor the first American actor to film at the studio's British facility. He even went against type and tried on a couple of swashbuckling roles. By 1939, he had 18 films under his belt, and although he was never able to fully shake the accusation that he was all looks and mediocre talent, he was packing movie theaters all over the world. And to MGM, this was the most important talent of all. It was in 1936, at the zenith of his early fame, that Robert Taylor's personal life became entwined with that of another Hollywood luminary, a partnership that would fascinate fans and gossip columnists for years. Barbara Stanwyck was already a top actress, 4 years older than Taylor and famed for her toughness and independence. She had come from a hard-knock Brooklyn gutter upbringing to become the highest-paid woman in America. She was known for her sharp wit and particularly guarded heart. Stanwyck was freshly divorced from her first husband and wary of romance when mutual friend Zeppo Marx arranged a dinner with Taylor. Taylor arrived nervous and starstruck. Stanwyck found herself surprised that she felt utterly charmed by the Nebraskan with the courtly manners. They bonded over a shared love of horseback riding and the outdoors. Both found refuge from Hollywood at working ranches. Taylor even bought one in the San Fernando Valley, and importantly, over a shared aversion to pretension. Despite their wildly different backgrounds, they discovered similar values. Both also leaned conservative in politics, a rarity even then in left-leaning Tinseltown, and in those charged pre-war years their ideological kinship was a point of connection. After a 3-year courtship conducted under the close eye of MGM's publicity department, Robert Taylor married Barbara Stanwyck on May 14, 1939. The wedding was a small, carefully managed affair. They eloped to San Diego to avoid media frenzy, accompanied by just a few friends. Zeppo's wife was matron of honor. Photographs of the newlyweds show a glowing Stanwyck and a bemusedly happy Taylor, both in Western attire at their ranch, the studio's ideal of an all-American couple. For a while, the marriage was one of Hollywood's most admired. Stanwyck, tough-minded and savvy, helped guide Taylor's career. Friends said she nudged him toward more challenging masculine roles to break his pretty boy image. Indeed, under her influence, 1941 would see Taylor take on a pair of gritty characters that shocked those who knew him only as a romantic hero. In Billy the Kid, he donned a six-shooter as the infamous outlaw, and in Johnny Eager, he played a cynical racketeer opposite Lana Turner. Taylor's turn as the slick, cold-hearted Johnny Eager won plenty of praise, and his co-star Van Heflin snagged an Oscar for the film. Stanwyck's mentoring seemed to pay off, and she remained his biggest fan. In public, the Taylors presented a picture of domestic bliss, often photographed at their ranch with their dogs and horses, or hosting poker nights with pals like Clark Gable. Stanwyck even semi-retired for a couple of years, apparently content to give up her breadwinner role to play housewife to Taylor's rising star. They appeared to be that rare thing in Hollywood, a stable, scandal-free couple. But behind the polite smiles and perfect profiles, fault lines were quietly forming in the Taylor-Stanwyck marriage. As World War II erupted overseas, new pressures bore down on Hollywood and on Taylor personally. He had always possessed a streak of visceral patriotism, and he aligned himself with interventionist ideals. In 1940, well before Pearl Harbor, he publicly criticized America's isolationists and proclaimed himself 100% pro-British in the fight against Nazism. And it's perhaps worth noting that his ancestry was split half and half between his ethnic German father and British origin mother, albeit both sides of his family having deep American roots. Now, with the U.S. entering the war, Taylor was determined to serve. In 1943, he enlisted in the U.S. Naval Air Force, earning a commission as a lieutenant and training as a pilot. This movie star did not angle for cushy USO tours. He genuinely wanted to contribute to combat. He had been flying planes since the mid-1930s. His own twin-engine plane was affectionately nicknamed Missy, after Stanwyck, and now those skills would be put to use for Uncle Sam. However, Taylor was more useful as a propaganda tool than cannon fodder, and so was assigned stateside as a flight instructor, teaching young aviators to fly and safely ferrying aircraft cross-country. He also lent his celebrity to the war effort by starring in and even directing dozens of Navy training films. In one period, he churned out 17 instructional shorts on everything from aerial gunnery to survival tactics, bringing a certain Hollywood polish to military pedagogy. He narrated the acclaimed documentary The Fighting Lady in 1944, a chronicle of an aircraft carrier in combat, delivering his voiceover in what one critic called a stern, self-effacing manner with no trace of the movie star. For these contributions, Taylor earned the respect of servicemen and a reputation as a true patriot off-screen. Barbara Stanwyck proudly supported her husband's service, and she also volunteered for war bong drives while he was in uniform. But the war years were not easy on their marriage. Taylor's long absences combined with the stresses of service put distance between them. And then there was the matter of Lana Turner. Back in 1941, during the filming of Johnny Eager, Taylor had begun an affair with his sultry young co-star, a liaison that was Hollywood's worst-kept secret. Stanwyck, plenty hardened by a remarkably tough life, which, by the way, you can hear all about in my episode on her, linked on screen now, initially swallowed her hurt. She understood the studio system's ways. On-screen chemistry often spilled off-screen, and MGM itself had in fact subtly encouraged the Taylor-Turner pairing to drum up publicity. Stanwyck's friends later said she was deeply wounded by Taylor's infidelity, but chose to ignore it for the sake of the marriage. Still, some of the warmth between the couple cooled. Taylor, for his part, emerged from the war a changed man. The boyishness of the 1930s was gone. In its place was a more hardened, mature persona. Photographs from 1945 show him in Navy uniform, face leaner and slightly weathered, the look of someone who had seen the larger world beyond Hollywood's make-believe. He returned to civilian life eager to pick up his film career, but also carrying the invisible baggage of wartime experience in a marriage grown more complicated with time. In Hollywood, the late 1940s proved to be a second act for Robert Taylor, darker, deeper, and often more interesting than what came before. He quickly resumed making movies after his 1945 discharge, and now his roles reflected a post-war gravitas. In the psychological thriller Undercurrent, he played against type as a mysterious, possibly murderous husband opposite Katharine Hepburn. In High Wall, an unusually gritty film noir, he portrayed a World War II vet tormented by brain trauma and accused of murder, a man grappling with mental illness and violence, far from the genial lovers of Taylor's past. The opening scene of High Wall is still jarring today. Taylor's character speeds down a highway with a dead body propped in the passenger seat. This was not the clean-cut hero fans were used to, and it signaled Taylor's bold effort to expand his acting range. He succeeded. Critics praised his taut, troubled performance, noting that the war had seemingly ruggedized Taylor, giving him an edge suited to these complex roles. Off-screen, too, he seemed more world-weary. He was still unfailingly polite and cooperative on set, but colleagues sensed an introspection in him. Years later, a friend observed that after the war, Bob wasn't all that interested in being a big movie star anymore. He worked to live, rather than lived for work. It was in this period that Taylor also took a definitive political stand, one that would soon engulf him in controversy. In 1944, he was a founding member of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. The Alliance was a group of fervently anti-communist Hollywood figures, among them John Wayne, Walt Disney, and Taylor's good friend Ronald Reagan, who pledged to defend the American way of life against subversive influences. In its charter, the group rallied against, quote, a rising tide of communism, fascism, and kindred beliefs that threatened to poison Hollywood's output. Taylor, an outspoken patriot since before the war, fit right in. He saw no contradiction in opposing both Nazi fascism and Soviet communism. To him, they were twin threats to freedom. I speak out against communism now for the same reason I spoke out against Nazism a decade ago, because I am pro-freedom and pro-decency, he declared in 1951. At the time, such views were not uncommon in Hollywood's small conservative circles, though the majority of industry folk either leaned left or tried to stay apolitical. Taylor's alignment with the anti-communist crusade would soon have consequences. The trigger came with Song of Russia, a 1944 film Taylor starred in that later became a political flashpoint. During the war, when the US and the Soviet Union were allies against Hitler, MGM produced Song of Russia as pro-Soviet propaganda, a rosy tale of an American conductor, Taylor, falling in love in the USSR amid the fight against Nazi invaders. By 1947, however, the Cold War had begun, and Song of Russia looked very different in hindsight. To anti-communist hawks in Washington, the film reeked of red influence. That year, Congress's House Un-American Activities Committee, aka HUAC, turned its attention to Hollywood. In May 1947, Taylor was one of a handful of film figures quietly invited to testify in a closed-door HUAC session in Los Angeles. Believing the meeting confidential, Taylor agreed and spoke candidly. He vented that he'd been, quote, forced to make Song of Russia, even delayed from entering military service until the picture was completed, implying the U.S. government itself pressured him into pro-Soviet propaganda. He also complained about certain colleagues without explicitly calling them communists, mentioning that, quote, one chap, Mr. Howard Da Silva, always seemed to have something to say at the wrong time, and noting that actress Karen Morley likewise caused trouble at union meetings. These comments were meant for the committee only. Instead, HUAC's chairman, J. Parnell Thomas, promptly leaked Taylor's testimony to the press, spinning it as proof that Washington had coerced stars into making pro-communist films. Then the headlines blared that Robert Taylor had blown the whistle on Hollywood Reds. Taylor felt betrayed by the committee and by his own naivety in speaking freely. His boss, MGM chief Louis B. Mayer, was furious too, but for a different reason. Mayer thought Song of Russia was innocuous and resented the implication that MGM made pro-red films. Mayer even screened the film for HUAC members to show it was simply a love story in an attempt to publicly undercut Taylor's complaints. For the first time in his career, Robert Taylor was at serious odds with his studio and facing public controversy. He was outraged at the committee's betrayal and told friends he felt made to look silly. As HUAC announced plans for aggressive public hearings on communist influence that October, Taylor wanted no part of it. I've never cared a whole hell of a lot for politicians. These investigations remind me more of a three-ring circus than a sincere effort to rid the country of a real threat. he wrote in a blunt letter to an HUAC investigator in September 1947. He hoped to avoid testifying again, but Congress was not to be denied. Taylor received a subpoena ordering him to Washington, facing contempt of Congress if he refused. He had no choice but to comply. So it was that on October 22, 1947, Robert Taylor found himself in that packed hearing room on Capitol Hill, under the Klieg lights and newsreel cameras. The committee, eager for maximum publicity, had even announced the exact day and time of his appearance, a courtesy or rather piece of showmanship, not afforded to most witnesses. Reporters duly noted the surging crowd of mostly female spectators and the Hollywood heartthrob's composure on the stand. To his credit, Taylor kept his testimony brief and relatively measured. He affirmed his staunch anti-communism, stating he had seen indications of communist activity in Hollywood, and that some scripts, quote, appeared to be slightly on the pink side, tinged with leftist bias. When pressed for names, he again mentioned Da Silva and Morley by name, but carefully avoided making formal accusations. Taylor stopped short of accusing them of being communists outright, but the implication was clear enough. Both Da Silva and Morley were later blacklisted, and as it happens, both were indeed acknowledged Communist Party members. Taylor also reiterated that he had only made Song of Russia under protest. Then, after barely 25 minutes of testimony, he exited as flashbulbs exploded and admiring fans, remarkably, cheered, "Hooray for Robert Taylor," in the halls. The spectacle was over, but its shadow would linger on Taylor's legacy. The fallout was mixed. HUAC supporters hailed Taylor as a patriotic, friendly witness, though privately the actor bristled at that label, insisting that he had been dragged there against his will. Many in Hollywood's liberal community, however, regarded Taylor with scorn after 1947. To them, he had been at best a pawn of the committee, at worst a willing stool pigeon who named names. The left-leaning press never quite forgave him. Decades later, his HUAC testimony was still cited as a black mark, an example of Hollywood's capitulation to the Red Scare. Taylor himself tried to move on, immersing back into filmmaking, but friends sensed that the experience deeply embittered him. The studio had not exactly gone to bat for him. Mayer's public distancing stung, and socially he found himself a bit isolated. Fortunately, Taylor's innate geniality and professionalism meant he was never shunned in the industry. He remained well-liked by coworkers, many of whom sympathized with his plight. Still, an aura of controversy trailed him into the 1950s, even as the worst of the blacklist era subsided. By the early 1950s, Robert Taylor had weathered war and political witch hunts, but now he faced upheavals in the realm he'd once considered rock solid, his home and his studio. The marriage to Barbara Stanwyck, the anchor in his life, was unraveling, and Hollywood itself was changing rapidly. Could the perfect leading man adapt to a world where his personal life and career security were no longer so certain? In 1951, Barbara Stanwyck filed for divorce from Robert Taylor, ending their 12-year marriage. The breakup was quiet and dignified on the surface. Incompatibility was the official reason, but the cracks had been visible for some time. They had grown apart. Her career had reignited. Stanwyck scored big hits like Sorry, Wrong Number, while Taylor was in the service. And she was fiercely self-reliant, whereas Taylor yearned for a more traditional family life. They had no children together. Stanwyck, who had an adopted son from her first marriage, seemed content without more, while Taylor increasingly longed to be a father. His wartime affair with Lana Turner and rumors of a dalliance with Ava Gardner, his co-star in 1948's The Bribe, had further eroded her trust in him. But Taylor was just getting started, and his continuous affairs finally broke Stanwyck's almost incredible patience and forgiveness. Ultimately, it was the embarrassment of having her husband derided in the press as a love rat due to his catalog of infidelities that broke her. By 1951, both Taylor and Stanwyck acknowledged that their perfect marriage was mostly a facade. When newspapers splashed headlines about Taylor's passionate romance with an Italian bit player named Lea De Leo, Stanwyck gave him an ultimatum: stop cheating or lose her. Taylor decided he would rather let Barbara go. Stanwyck later confided to friends that Taylor was the love of her life, but the relationship had simply died due to his affairs. She never remarried, as some close to her claimed. She loved him until the day she died. Taylor, too, kept his feelings guarded. He publicly called Stanwyck a wonderful woman and refrained from any recrimination. When the divorce came through in February 1952, Taylor moved on, a bachelor again at 40, older, not a lot wiser, and perhaps a touch lonelier. Professionally, Taylor was reaching the end of one epoch and the start of another. He had been under contract at MGM for 25 years, an extraordinarily long tenure that set a Hollywood record. But the old studio system was crumbling in the 1950s. One by one, the great stars of MGM's golden age were leaving or being dropped as the studio restructured. Taylor would be the last of the studio's golden era leading men to still be on contract by the late 50s. In 1953, he scored one of the biggest triumphs in Quo Vadis, an epic spectacle where he played a Roman general opposite Deborah Kerr's Christian heroine, and in which he had met Lea De Leo during the 1951 shoot. The film was a smash hit, grossing over $11 million and reaffirming Taylor's bankability. He followed it with a string of colorful costume adventures: Ivanhoe, Knights of the Round Table, and the adventures of Quentin Durward, many of them shot on location in England or elsewhere in Europe. These lavish epics kept Taylor in the global spotlight. In fact, in 1954, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association named him the world's most popular male film star, citing an audience of 500 million moviegoers abroad who adored him. And yet, Taylor's own interests were shifting. Perhaps taking a cue from his friend and fellow outdoorsman Gary Cooper, he found himself increasingly drawn to westerns, a genre he loved since boyhood. Interestingly, it was in the genre that Taylor would finally prove his acting chops. Beginning with Devil's Doorway, a controversial film at the time, in which he portrayed a Native American war hero facing bigotry, now regarded as one of his finest performances, Taylor began donning cowboy hats and six-shooters more often. He was a natural horseman and crack shot in real life. His college friend Joel McRae, another Western star, even stabled Taylor's favorite horse on his ranch during the war. In others, like Westward the Woman, a gritty wagon train drama that Taylor considered one of his personal favorites, and The Law and Jake Wade, Taylor brought an easy authenticity to the screen. By mid-decade, he acknowledged westerns were his preferred genre, and he was happy to ride the range on film. In his personal life, the 1950s brought renewal. In 1952, not long after his divorce, Taylor met a stunning German actress named Ursula Thies. She was an up-and-coming starlet, dark-haired and delicate-featured. The press reported he'd finally met someone even prettier than he was. Taylor was smitten. Still burned by one failed marriage, he courted Ursula cautiously. They dated for 2 years before marrying in a small ceremony in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in May 1954. At 43, Robert Taylor embarked on a second chance at domestic happiness. This time, it truly was the conventional family life he'd craved. Ursula left her acting career to focus on home, and soon they welcomed children, a son, Terrence, in 1955, and a daughter, Tessa, in 1959. Taylor reveled in fatherhood. Friends noted that he seemed more content puttering on his 113-acre ranch, or playing with his kids than chasing roles at the studio. The man who once graced every magazine cover now happily spent weekends mowing his lawn and fixing fences in blue jeans. He retained his love of flying. He'd take Ursula up in his plane for pleasure flights, and he taught his young son to shoot and fish as his own father had taught him. By all accounts, this period was the calmest and happiest in Taylor's life. That's not to say he quit acting. Far from it. Robert Taylor remained a working actor well into the 1960s, but he began to segue from feature films to the burgeoning medium of television. In 1958, after nearly a quarter century, his formal contract with MGM expired. The studio exercised one last option to have him star in a 1963 Western, Cattle King, but otherwise he was free. Taylor quickly jumped at the new opportunities TV offered. In 1959, he produced and headlined a weekly crime series, The Detectives, starring Robert Taylor playing a police detective. The show ran for 3 seasons on ABC and later NBC, bringing Taylor into America's living rooms and introducing him to a younger generation. Taylor enjoyed the lighter workload of television and the regular schedule that let him be home for dinner. When The Detectives ended in 1962, he continued making occasional films. A late career standout was the offbeat cult noir Party Girl, where he played a crippled mob lawyer seeking redemption opposite Sid Charisse. But increasingly, he treated acting as a job, not a star's life. In 1964, he even reunited on screen with Barbara Stanwyck for the first time since their divorce, in The Night Walker, a luridly enjoyable little horror film. The 2 ex-spouses played a married couple entangled in a murderous plot. They were friendly on set, professionals to the end. It was a poignant coda to their personal saga. The old chemistry flickered, just one last time. By the mid-1960s, one of Taylor's closest friends, Ronald Reagan, had shifted careers from acting to politics and was preparing to run for governor of California. In 1966, Reagan handed off his job as host of the popular Western anthology TV show, Death Valley Days. The man who took over as presenter was none other than Robert Taylor. With a certain odd symmetry, Taylor became the on-screen storyteller of frontier tales, while his friend pursued the real-world political stage among the elites. Taylor hosted Death Valley Days from 1966 until 1969, lending his folksy authority and famous face to the TV vignettes of pioneer life. It was an easy, semi-retired gig that allowed him to stay in the public eye without the grind of constant production. He also dabbled in one last round of film adventures abroad, jetting to Argentina for Savage Pampas, to Egypt for the adventure caper The Glass Sphinx, and to France for the Cold War comedy The Day the Hotline Got Hot. These late career films were modest and did very little to enhance his legacy, but Taylor approached them with his typical professionalism. On set, he was still the courteous veteran who knew his craft and hit his marks, even as he privately began to feel the weight of years. But aging would sadly not be a process that Taylor would have the luxury of facing. In early 1968, Robert Taylor received a devastating diagnosis: lung cancer. A lifelong heavy smoker like so many stars of his era, he was rarely seen without a cigarette and was encouraged to smoke by both the studio and PR companies who were hand in glove with big tobacco. But now Taylor's habit had caught up with him. He underwent surgery to remove one lung, but the disease had spread. Taylor kept his illness largely private, continuing to work on Death Valley Days as long as he could. By the spring of 1969, however, he grew too weak to continue. On May 26, 1969, in what must have been an agonizing decision, he filmed a brief farewell message for Death Valley Days, stepping down from the show. Less than 2 weeks later, on June 8, 1969, Robert Taylor died at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. He was 57 years old. Taylor's funeral was held at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, and it drew a who's who of Hollywood's golden age. Barbara Stanwyck, the woman who had once been his wife and never stopped caring for him, attended in somber silence. She had not remarried and was said to be distraught by his passing, a final bittersweet chapter in their enduring bond. The eulogy was delivered by Taylor's close friend, the by-now California Governor Ronald Reagan. Reagan spoke warmly of Taylor's integrity and Midwestern virtues. His touching but slightly odd tribute noted that moviegoers could always count on Robert Taylor's wholesomeness. He said, quote, "In the darkened theater, he'd never embarrass them in front of their children." Indeed, through over 80 films and 2 decades of stardom, Taylor had never once played a scene that could shame or scandalize conservative America. No lurid antics or vulgar outbursts. He was, in that sense, a throwback to a more innocent Hollywood heroism, and Reagan's remark captured how Taylor's good guy persona had been appreciated by the public. In the final analysis, Robert Taylor's life was not a tale of scandal or tragedy, but rather of steady, earnest dedication to his craft and principles. He began as the face that launched 1,000 sighs, and ended as something perhaps more meaningful, a steady figure of integrity in an industry often short on it. Robert Taylor may never have lost that perfect profile to age, but it's the character behind it, the professionalism, the decency, the resilience, that marks his place in Hollywood history. That's about all for this week. If you enjoyed this one, why not let me know which of Taylor's movies is your favorite in a comment. And be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video with a friend. If you want a little more from me, then I have another series titled Hollywood Histories available over on Patreon and for YouTube members. There's a 7-day free trial on Patreon so you can try it out with no strings and see if you enjoy the extra weekly episodes. Until next time, sweet dreams.